Hello, everyone. I believe I'm allowed to start right now. So let's start with the presentation. My name is Oliver Leis. I'm from Germany, Leipzig University. Just have an echo. Give me a second. Okay, now. So esport continues to grow, as we just saw with the recent League of Legends Worlds final that drew over 6.7 million peak viewers, averaged 1.5 million throughout the entire event, and was awarded with $5 million in prize money. Imagine being responsible for managing 5 players at once, being viewed by this amount of audience, and also trying to manage team strategy, communication within a team, emotions, and expectations from the organization. That's the reality of esport coaches. Yet, when we think about esports, we often just talk about the audience, the viewership, the prize money, or the global outreach. And it's this very role, the coach, that has a massive influence on the performance, the development, and the health and well-being of esport players and teams. We know from traditional research that coaches play an essential role in the development, well-being, and performance of athletes. And we also know about the experience of those coaches and how they perceive and handle the environment, such as stressors of underperforming players or extended working hours. What we know from esport research is so far very limited. We know that coaches structure their training in a different way, but we don't know very much or very much detail about their experiences of stressors and how they try to manage that. On the other hand, interest in esports has substantially increased over the past decades, for example, from sports psychologists entering esports and trying to support those coaches, those players, while there's also a lack of evidence-based intervention strategies. And therefore, today's presentation will focus on the stressors and coping strategies among esport coaches to indicate future research and inform practical implications that can help to support the backbone of an esport team, the coach, to then also have an influence not only on their performance, well-being, and development, but also on the entire team's performance and development. What we did was recruiting 12 male professional and semi-professional coaches. They were aged average 29 years old, had an experience of 7 years of coaching in esports, and also 5 out of 12 participants worked in or had previous sport coaching experience. We used a semi-structured interview design averaging 77 minutes, mainly surrounding 2 questions. The first one was what stressors they experience in their role as a coach. And the second one was primarily surrounding the question of how they try to deal with that. And the specific question here was, how do you try to deal with stress in your coaching role? The data was analyzed using reflective thematic analysis. And in the following, we will look at the most significant results that echo the findings based from my perspective, because given the time constraints, we can't touch on everything, but I'm happy to go into more detail in the discussion. So let's dive into stressors, also known as the environmental demands that tax or exceed the coach's resources to manage a situation. The first one that was quite significant among the coaches' accounts was framed as performance and interpersonal demands. And here they often talk about performance expectations from the organization, but also from the players. But surprisingly, they more often talked about stress raising from the empathy and the weight for individual players and how they perform and how they, the players themselves, feel about performance. And this was something that the 12 professional and semi-professional coaches echoed across the interviews. In addition to that, they found it quite hard. And this coach, Phil, 42 years old, described that this was an incredibly stressful and unpleasant work because they, the coaches, sometimes had the wrong people. And what they meant by that is that they had people that think they are better than everyone else. and they had a hard time making them listening to their approaches and their training practices and what they try to bring in terms of benefiting the team. On the other hand, the coaches often emphasized organizational demands as a source of stress. And here we have a quote from Mark, who's one of the few semi-professional coaches within our sample with 3 years of experience. And he said that sometimes organizations are completely clueless. So they don't have an understanding of the coaching role or the environment or what it needs to have a performing and successful esport teams. And that might cause responses such as removing one player from the team, which is here described as people would make random changes out of nowhere, not consulting anyone, which means that coaches are then confronted with a rapid change within the team structure that they need to fix without being asked first. And this was something that not only occurred once within the 12, but in addition, based on the second biggest code of stressors, or theme of stressors, organizational demands, we found that coaches struggled with managing multiple roles that might not fit their competencies. So this might not be what they signed up for when they entered the coaching role. And here Thomas is arguing that he needs to organize everything, book scrims, and also be responsible for organizing travels for the team. In addition to that, the coaches often mention that the industry is quite volatile, which we heard from the previous quote, that there are random changes. But this also addressed the job insecurity and that they don't know if their job will be gone the next day or the next month, and if someone else might get the position. And in addition to that, given that they spend a lot of time, given that they work within their passion, on the other hand, as Ryan bluntly described it as, the payment is piss poor. So emphasizing that they don't do it for the money, they do it because it might be their passion. Something that was quite surprising, because we don't see it that often across professional players, is that social media was something that might be accounted as a source of stress, but among the coaches, it was just a minor stressor, if we could say so. And here one coach said that there is some pressure from social media, but for him, it's not a big deal because he's asking himself who he should really care about, and it's not the people on social media. And other factors mentioned with regard to social exposure were content creation or social media interviews. Last but certainly not least, another big theme that we found within the data set was personal and professional life. And here the coaches often describe that they put in a lot of hours to work as a professional coach on a high level and be successful and bring some benefit to the team. And this was related to some impact on their personal life, as stated within this quote by Mark, who said private plans are very difficult to carry out. And he even had struggled to communicate, for example, vacation with his wife. And coaches often express that they work between 60 or 90 hours doing intensive weeks. And even if we assume this number is too high estimated, there is a lot of truth in that and in the stories that they told us. And again, we see the mentioning of the payment, which might also be related to a personal aspect. This is just an overview of the 4 themes we just discussed with example quotes, and I'm happy to go into more detail 7 or 8 minutes in the discussion. The way the coaches tried to handle and manage those situations or those stressors were the following. The most prominent one was to foster a supportive environment. So they tried to change the environment, the team structure, the team dynamics, to limit the likability of those stresses occurring. And what they did was, for example, hitting conversations head on. So open and honest communication to maybe have a difficult situation in the short term, but in the long run, have a more successful and more healthy relationship with the players. In addition to that, coaches often mentioned setting values or setting goals and create shared values across teammates. Another aspect that was very surprising and interesting in the way that coaches expressed it was resting as a relational and professional practice. Coaches often express that they felt a little bit bad, and they often extended periods of working, so they are present doing work, but not rest. They waited until the end. And here Phil has described that he was finally actually able to come into his own body again. And they often played video games, did some physical activity, did some mobility, got them fresh air. But the essential thing here was that professional and semi-professional coaches noted that resting is very important to be successful, and this is something that they need to do, but they waited a lot of time and a long time for periods when they actually try to do it. An additional thing was managing focus, emotions, and meaning. And what is meant by this was that coaches often embraced and nurtured their love for the industry itself. We heard about the payment being piss poor or putting in a lot of working hours, but for the coaches, this was part of their process. This was part of what they love. They were aware of the positive and negative sides and tried to nurture and embrace the positive side even more. And on the other hand, less positive framed, coaches stated that it's their job to be a bit detached from everything, and they need to do what the players need in the moment. And then they put themselves second and focus on themselves when there's time. And Thomas here explained that sometimes you need to activate the players or bring them down, but you need to be there when they need you. As we just heard, the coping strategies were categorized into 3 themes: fostering a supportive environment, including goal setting, cultivating shared values, or even encouraging open dialogue; rest as a relational and professional practice, including watching television, physical activity, cooking, preparing meals, or even some more psychological strategies such as meditation or breathing exercises, but these were less frequently mentioned. And the third category we formed was managing focus, emotion, and meaning, including avoidance behaviors, not thinking about it, venting, for example, using Discord channels to talk with other coaches and vent about situations, or to friends and family, and reframing situations or seeking external support outside of the esports environment. To summarize those findings and then move on to the discussion, we found some parallels with sport research, but also with research among esport players regarding stressors and coping strategies. And these were the things we just looked into that I would slightly skip given the time constraints. In terms of limitations and future research, we recruited participants using X, or formerly known as Twitter, and just posted one tweet, and then a lot of people responded to it. Surprisingly, those were only male and only those working in professional or semi-professional esports, which might be argued as a benefit, but also limits us with generalizing, which is not the aim of qualitative research, but it doesn't help us to tell something about the experience of female or amateur coaches. So future research might want to look into that, as well as how the experiences might relate to personality traits, self-confidence, or performance levels among the coaches. Additionally, we might add to that a broader perspective, including the frequency, the intensity, duration, controllability of those stressors. And what is meant by that can be explained by one example. If we look into the organizational stressor theme that was mentioned and random changes made by the organization, we might want to figure out how often do those situations happen, how intense are they perceived, how long do those situations last until they are solved and managed, and how much control do players or coaches perceive in managing or controlling them. Additionally, we should be aware that although we presented some categories and some coping strategies within different clusters, they are not done in a vacuum and are often combined. So it might be that I communicate with other coaches, but also do physical activity while doing so and being on run. So we might want to investigate the efficacy of those combined strategies using objective measures, because interview studies don't provide us with objective data, and combine it with innovative methodologies such as Paulus and colleagues over in Australia did with diary studies or thinking aloud research. In terms of practical implications, we might want to argue that interventions might want to focus on feedback and communication and how honest and open communication can be done. We want to stress the importance of social networks. Coaches often mentioned exchanging with friends, exchanging with other coaches on Discord, and actively seeking those channels when under stress might be something that has a lot of value for the majority of coaches. Maybe not for everyone, but we assume for the majority. Sport psychology support or clinical psychology support, for example, and task delegation can be quite valuable, depending, of course, on the availability of resources. We are aware that while we research professional teams, amateur teams have limited resources, and they might benefit from involving interns or involving someone on an honorary basis. And the last aspect we want to mention, which is not exhaustive, is that it seems very helpful to, similar to the coaches, create a supportive and shared environment using a shared vision, shared values and goals among players and staff, and involve the coaches within the decision making in terms of the organization level. To conclude, this study provides just a starting point for sport and exercise psychology or other fields interested in the experience of professional or semi-professional esport coaches. We need to add on that and extend previous research on stresses and coping to further detail the similarities and differences between sports and esport coaches. And this will help us to provide specific, appropriate support, research, and also educational and consultative services. Thank you very much. These are the references, and I would also like to extend my gratitude to the co-authors that are involved, Dylan Paulus, Mike Trotter, Faye Didymus, and Laura Swettenham. If you have questions, I am very much looking forward to them after enabling my audio again. Thank you.
Lovely, that's great, Oliver. Thank you very much for presenting. I think there's some really interesting implications there when you're talking about the business decisions and changes and the impact of performance and stress on the players and coaches. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
We do have one question from chat from XZ10, who says, hello, did you do from some statistical analyses, even if there's only 12 subjects, to examine which stressors were more impactful and recurrent among coaches? This may allow to focus on some coping strategies to be more efficient.
Yeah, thank you very much for this thoughtful question. I agree that this would be very valuable. And as we argued in the future research section, this is something that should definitely be done. And we have studies among esport players that did so by, for example, Paulus and colleagues. And if you don't have access, let me know. I can share the paper with you. But our study was the first of its kind, to our knowledge. And that's why we first wanted to provide an initial understanding and see what's out there, provide a big picture. And based on this big picture, we now know what's there on a more descriptive level. And we can, of course, describe it with descriptive quotes from the participants. But it's just a starting step. So it has some value, but now it's better to go into more detail with approaches that you just mentioned. But qualitative research is not there to be generalized for all participants and just provides us with the initial picture. Well, thank you. Great question.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Oliver. As you are the next talk as well, are you happy to go straight into that?
Yeah, I can do so. And maybe if other questions come up given the next topic I'm talking about, because it might be slightly related, feel free to ask questions in the other discussion then.
Yeah, we'll come back into this after that talk. The title of your next talk is Psychology Practitioners in Esports, Challenges and Opportunities in Applied Practice. So if you'd like to take it away whenever you're ready.
Okay.